Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unnext News Radio podcast, your news source for all things unexplained. And now, here's your host for the Unnext News podcast, Margie Kay.
Good evening and welcome to Unnext News. I'm your host, Margie Kay. We are here every Friday evening, and you can listen to the show on our website at unnextnetwork.com or on your favorite app, or watch it on YouTube, as we are doing this evening. And I have a special guest this evening, so stay tuned for that in just a couple of minutes. I do want to talk about something really important coming up. I think you're going to love. The X Conference 2022 is virtual on Zoom, so you do not need to leave home. You can attend from anywhere in the world. This is being held on May 13th to 14th, and you can register at unnextnetwork.com. So don't miss that. It is a great deal. It's $29 for each day, 2 days, where we have a really good lineup of speakers, but also we are going to do a live paranormal investigation with an investigation team at a really haunted place. So you're going to love this. So be sure to register for that anytime between now and May 10th. Also, I would like to mention this really good book I highly recommend. It's by Debbie Ziegelmeyer. She's the state director for Missouri MUFON. She's also on the board of directors for International MUFON, and she's the director of the Underwater Research and Recovery Team. She has just released this book, The Alien Colonization of Earth's Waterways, and it is a reference guide to underwater and near water UFO and USO sightings. I think you will love it. Also, you will be able to get special t-shirts because the X Conference theme is Into the Rabbit Hole, and of course, you know why that is. My guest this evening is Rich Hoffman. Rich is a 25-plus year Army Information Technology Defense contractor with Chugach, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Government Solutions. He's a Senior Systems Engineer Analyst working in the U.S. Army Materiel Command Headquarters at Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama, helping to shape the future directions of systems, networks, and application hosting arrangements used within the Army. But Rich is also a UFO investigator. Welcome to the program, Rich. And let me unmute you. Okay, welcome to the program.
Hi. It's good to be on with you, Margie.
It's good to see you again. You recently did a program for Missouri MUFON, and it was very well received. I really appreciate you doing that. So tell me this. Let's get started with how the heck did you get interested in the UFO subject?
Well, I'm going to go back in my memory bank. So I got started in 1964. I was 13 years old. I was in an 8th grade science class, and the assignment was to go do a 10-minute presentation on a subject that was on a list. I was late to class, and consequently, everybody put their name next to a subject, and the only one that was available that nobody put their name next to was UFOs. And so I put my name next to it. I went up to Mr. Bayshore after class, my science teacher, and said, "What's a UFO?" And he said, "Unidentified flying objects." He said, "Go and study it." I did very little and poor job with it. I actually probably came across a book called My Trip to Venus or something of that nature. And that was about it, So I probably gave a little presentation at that time and showed how naive I was as being a 13-year-old. And then what happened was Mr. Bayshore basically came up and started asking me about jet pursuits and shooting at the objects, and I'm going like, "What? I don't know anything about that." So I got a D on that report because I did so poorly. I went home that evening and I started hearing about a case in Socorro, New Mexico, and that was the Lonnie Zamora case from April 24th, 1964. And when I heard Walter Cronkite talking about this, and I saw what they were talking about, shrubs being burned and various other kinds of markings on the ground, like footprints and stuff, and I'm hearing about this policeman, I thought, wow, that's really is interesting, and there must be something to it. A couple days later, I had an aunt that was going to a bookstore, and she invited me to go along. I went in and asked the people at the desk, "Do you have any books on UFOs?" And they walked me over to this one section, and there was a book on the report on unidentified flying objects by Captain Edward Ruppelt, and he was the former Blue Book officer for a number of years, and I read it, and I found out that Blue Book was just up the street from me at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, right? And anyway, that got me hooked. I basically ended up finding out about that. I could not get enough information at all on the subject. I was doing newspaper clippings. I was literally going out and buying any book that I can get. I was watching all the shows on it. By the time I was doing that, I was already giving lectures around adults on the topic in Dayton, Ohio. And shortly after that, Phil Donahue had me on in Dayton. And the next thing I know is I became name-worthy as being the UFO guy in Dayton, Ohio. So I carried on from there, got hooked into it, finally, eventually started my own organization. But then I heard that there was a Midwest UFO Network, and I got hooked into them right around the beginning of 1970 or right at the end of 69. I couldn't remember which, but I became a member with them as well, and went on from there to become the state section director, and we moved on to the Alabama, Mississippi state director. Then I went on from there to become the deputy director of investigations and the STAR team manager for MUFON, and then ended up in 2017 being or actually before that, I was the director of strategic projects, which was looking at using technology to be able to study these things. That's my history.
How busy were you when you worked with MUFON? Of course, this is a volunteer organization. How many hours did you spend on it?
Well, I mean, you can imagine being the state director at the same time of two states, Mississippi as well as also with the Alabama. And then I became at the same time, I was also the deputy director and STAR team manager. When I was doing that, I was spending almost all my time on it practically. I still had to work because I had to make money to pay bills, but I was working with the Army for that. And I was pretty busy. So I was working around the clock for the most part. And I would say that probably with also holding meetings and giving lectures at the meetings that I had here in Huntsville, I was probably spending on average about 35 hours a week just dedicated to UFO.
Yeah. I can relate to that.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and that's kind of what a person means when they say once you go in the rabbit hole, you can't get out, because you keep chasing and chasing for answers, and there's always something new and different coming up, isn't there?
Always. I mean, case investigations really don't end; they keep going, because ultimately it's a situation where some other thing comes to light. Maybe it might be a month or 2 months down the road, or it might even be a year later. And so really you've got to keep up with the cases that you work. I mean, even with SCU, we investigated the Nimitz case, and we also investigated the Aguadilla case in Puerto Rico. And it took us 2 years of study to do that. And I'm talking about a team of 5 easily that were all dedicated to that effort, right? Mm-hmm. And so it takes a lot to go study these things, and you're always turning up new things. You might have a situation where finally another report comes in that helps you about that case, Or if you kept following it up, you might have somebody that might be an air traffic controller that's going to get back to you and say, oh, by the way, we did find something in our logbooks, or we found something that might help you, right? So cases really never end, and especially the good ones where you want to spend a lot of time on them. And so that's pretty much where I've been almost all my life, is that just it takes a long time to really look at these things, and you have to continue to look at them.
Now, in 2017, you left your positions at MUFON to start a scientific organization known as the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, or SCU. What is that all about?
So what we found, what I found specifically is that within MUFON, when they started to talk about secret spaceship programs, secret trips to the moon and all that other stuff, you had scientists who don't necessarily get into, like, they call it the woo factor, right? But they tend to want to be scientific in their approach. They want to be able to talk with it about that, and they don't want their credibility impinged because some organization is out there wanting to, talk about that stuff that they think is woo, right? So ultimately, it was a situation where we got involved. There were 5 of us that got involved with a case in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. That was in 2013. And we actually ended up getting the video passed to us, but we all had to sign non-disclosure agreements with the pilot out of Miami that knew the other pilot in Aguadilla who had the encounter. They gave us the video, which we spent 2 years analyzing, and actually broke it into 7,027 individual frames on that video. It was 3 minutes and 54 seconds long, and we broke that. We looked at every frame, and we did analysis down to every pixel of like the cells of each of those pictures. So we were going down to the cellular level of the image to analyze it, and so we could actually make out details, like, for example, that the object, which was about 3 to 5 feet in diameter, we could tell that because it went behind a telephone pole, and we were able to know its exact position. We also saw other kinds of indications that it was really relatively a bizarre object. We had to go and study and get all the camera data about this military grade camera. We got actually radar hits on the object when it was out in the ocean before it came on land. It had 50 hits on that, and if you take a look at the individual hits of that, you'd see that this thing's going much like the Tic Tac was, where it was doing a herky-jerky motion over the water. This was doing a similar kind of thing, and the speeds were like, incredible stop, and then 1,000 miles an hour instantaneously some other direction. And so we had that kind of evidence. We, investigated, tried to get a hold of a lot of different people. We spoke to people. Some people didn't cooperate, like the control tower we couldn't get a hold of. But anyway, we actually analyzed that thing to death and published a 167-page report that broke down the all aspects of that case, and it's up on our website. But the point being was that we spent all that time doing that. Because when we published our paper, we were still a team we were all MUFON. But we couldn't talk with MUFON about it because we had signed those NDAs, and they didn't want it to go that way, the pilots and everything. So the gist for us was that we were caught in kind of like a quandary there. How do you deal with a case where they don't want you to go to an organization, but they want you to treat it scientifically, right? Right. And so we had physicists. One of the members was a physicist. One's a mathematician. I was in the defense world, so I could get camera information and data. And so we all had these different disciplines. We could come together to do that. Anyway, the bottom line is we published it, and then MUFON was not very happy with us because we didn't take it through MUFON. I later pointed out the fact that it was actually reported through MUFON, and it was that somebody had actually reported it, and nobody assigned it to anybody.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And
That's a
so
no-no.
it was in Puerto Rico. It was reported from Puerto Rico, and again, nobody did anything with it. And so that would have sat there for a long time, and we didn't, so we were glad that we did the work, and we could publish the paper. And then we went and had a meeting with Jan and several other people, Clifford Clift. We also talked with John Schuessler and others. We explained our situation, the fact that that they came to us with this non-disclosure stuff, and they pretty much were okay with it. They realized that, hey, look, that this probably was going to happen, and it did. But then shortly after that, there were a lot of things, as you very well know, that were coming on. You had the John Ventry kind of thing that was going on. You had other kinds of problems, and then you had this conference where you had a lot of people now seeing the secret spaceship programs and stuff like that. And scientists were saying they were leaving. So we made a decision that we would create this organization just for scientists to get together, where they could feel comfortable having conversations, because after all, that's what we want them to do. And so that's kind of like how SCU became its own organization.
What types of different technologies do you use in your investigations?
Well, I mean, we've got specialized software. We've got all kinds we have labs that we could go to with stuff. We've got different kinds of material testing we can do. It's a whole gamut of different kinds of things. We got people trained in every discipline. So we have, everything from physicists to mathematicians to statisticians to, just every discipline's covered, and engineering. And so we can pretty much create teams that can go after scientific data and evidence and really tackle it from a multidisciplinary kind of approach, right? And so that's kind of like what we're doing right now. We've analyzed the Nimitz case, we've analyzed the Aguadilla case, and we've also just are finishing up on that rubber duck video that was from Homeland Security, that case as well, where we analyzed that video. And so that'll probably be being published, and we'll post it up on our website. But we've got a lot of scientific papers that are put together. We're collecting all those. We're trying to get our own journal put in place. And we also do we do peer review. We actually send it out and allow organizations and people to basically comment on the papers that we publish. And that's what we're doing.
That's what I was going to ask you next is, are these results published, and can anybody read them?
Yes, they're all available on our website at explorescu.org.
Okay. Do you ever go out into the field and investigate? Let's say somebody has seen craft or UFOs or something related to that over a period of time. Will you actually go out at their site to investigate?
The organization's not set up yet to do things like that. We were looking at that in the context of setting up our own reporting system, and we're still finalizing and making adjustments to that. But we have a team of people that could conceivably do that, that could go out and investigate. But again, we're looking at cases where there's strong multisensory kind of data, like radar or sonar or something of that nature that somebody picks up on, electromagnetic kind of effects to the case, or where there's actually sensory kind of data. And we're also looking to be able to put our own instrumentation. So we're looking at right now buying some systems and setting them out to be able to collect information and data. And then we would analyze the data and all that evidence. So I am also still investigating to some extent. Let me clarify that we have, I looked for 3 years. I've been following a phenomena about an hour away from me in Florence. there's an area called Cloverdale that's just north of Florence, Alabama. And since 1973, they've had what they call the Earthlight mystery. And there's
Right.
if you think about Earthlights, you're thinking about like these balls of gas that ignite and somehow maneuver through the air. And a lot of people call them spook lights, or they'll call them orbs or something like that. That's just because they don't know what to call them. Even the residents in the area will basically call it like there goes the spook lights. But they've been seeing them for a long time. And so we actually set up instrumentation over in that area. We did capture some interesting things. And so, to that extent, when you have a repeatable phenomena, yeah, it's good to go out and check it out.
Well, we have the famous Joplin or Hornet spook light in Missouri and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And it's been there for about 200 years at least, going back, according to our records. Nobody has figured that out yet. Do you have any thoughts on what these actually might be?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've been able to take and I would encourage the same thing to happen there, by the way, spectral images of the actual objects themselves. And you can break it down into its constituent gases and find out for sure what that is. So like in Hesteland, who also has a lot of these in Norway, Erling Strand has been able to get spectral images of that object over there. Mm-hmm. We've also had images of these objects in Pennsylvania. And we've been able to also get other data. And we find out that they're made of these chemicals. Like, let me give you an example. In Hesteland, Norway, was nitrogen, oxygen, and it had iron, sulfur, and it also had scandium. And so in Pennsylvania, it had all those constituent elements as well, but it had yttrium, and as opposed to the scandium. Now, if you look on the periodic table, you'll find out that they're both rare earth metals. They are just one's right below the other on the periodic table. And that I'll point out to you that Hollywood uses scandium to make nighttime sets look like daytime sets.
Oh.
Because it creates illumination. And if you think about that, then these ball of gases have some components to them to be able to allow them to ignite and to shine brilliantly, right? In the case of Cloverdale, they were about 8 foot in diameter. And then during the summer months, they seemed to be like about 3 to 4 feet in diameter, not as big. They seemingly have some sort of electromagnetic property or magnetic property, because they can also connect themselves to things that are metal and travel along with the object. And I know that when I was investing in MUFON, there was a case where you had a red object that followed a car at 65 miles an hour down a highway, and it stayed like attached to it, if you would. It kept moving around that. Well, the same thing happened with the train here in Cloverdale. When the train came by and it was on a railroad track, it kind of connected itself. It didn't directly touch it, but it had like a connection with the train and moved along with the train. And if you think about that in the context of Foo Fighters, you also have those things going around the object or the aircraft, right? Back in the early days. And we're also getting cases in Vietnam of that as well. So you had a lot of people that were seeing and smelling sulfur gas that it was also a constituent part. And when I did the investigations in Cloverdale, you find out that the ponds there have a lot of the ponds that are out in that area, that specific limestone area, if you would, are all filled with sulfur. So is this some sort of a belching ball of gas? And the other interesting thing is that like the ones in Cloverdale, traveled either east to west or west to east. You wouldn't see them going north to south. They would and they go against the wind. The wind direction has no impact, apparently. Mm-hmm. And here, another interesting feature is that I could be standing on one side of it, you're standing on the other side of it. You wouldn't see it, and I will see it on my side, which means that the actual light is maybe unidirectional as opposed to omnidirectional. And and in 1973, if you look at the work of Harley Rutledge in Piedmont,
Yes.
you'll see that he had cases where he was looking at objects that were basically in the Piedmont area. That's in your neck of the woods, where the objects would be seen on the ground, and like the pilot overhead was not seeing it. So again, he was not seeing the light as he's flying over it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with his work on that. This Joplin spook light. Well, we have several spook lights in Missouri. They're all along in the southern part of the state, across the entire state. So we've got Piedmont, we've got Marley Woods, and the Joplin. Now, the Joplin spook light behaves in an intelligent manner at times. I witnessed it when I was 14 years old. My dad took us out to see it. There were actually two lights. There was a big one and a smaller one behind it. And the small one followed the big one. Then the big one went in front of our car. The small one went inside of our car, through one window in the back seat, across us and out the other window, joined up with the other one, and they went off together. Now, to me, that sounds like something under intelligent control, or some type of intelligence was involved there. And then recently, in recent years, people in the area report actually seeing the spook light come into their house through a wall, not even through a door or window, just through the wall. There it is, goes through their living room and out through another wall. Have you had any of those types of incidences happen?
Yes, and in fact, I was going to point out to you, there's several books written by a gentleman by the name of William Corliss, who I recommend that all researchers get a hold of some of the copies of these things. William Corliss has documented luminous phenomena in the skies at an extreme level. I mean, he's written books, relatively thick books, and he's done a lot of diagrams on them. But he's got a lot of different cases that you can take a look at. And these things are just, they pop through the walls. They could go through windows. They can maneuver around in a house. They can go from standstill to shooting straight up at an incredible rate of speed. We don't know a lot about them, which is why I think that, scientists need to really, especially atmospheric type of scientists, and we need to be having instrumented studies to be able to really find out what we can about that phenomena, because it's quite different to see something that's a ball of gas, if you would, or something like a plasma or something like that, and you think of it that way. But like you say, that it has some degree of motions and maneuverability that seem to indicate like it has intelligent control behind it. And then, so I think we really need to study those things. And in many of these cases, like you're pointing out, and like I just pointed out, they're repeatable events. They happen continuously over a long period of time. So let's get out and do some real strong instrumented studies and find out what that phenomena truly is. As you very well know, it's like, unless you have a hot spot where you've got some sort of like a tic tac where it's more solid, you can go look at it like Catalina, or you can go somewhere else. I mean, ultimately there you can do some other kinds of studies, and you're actually going to capture some. But what I'm trying to get at is that this phenomena is repeatable, and it's also being confused with like the tic tac, or it's confused in many regards. And we could be able to actually identify some of these things and learn more about just what we have up in the sky if we spend that amount of time really doing the instrumented studies that we need.
Absolutely. There's another type of a ball of light or an orb that I'd like to ask you about. In a couple of my cases, about 3 cases, I went on site because they would be ongoing cases, got my own photographs. And then when I enlarge the photographs and look at these balls of light, it looks like there's a tiny extraterrestrial being inside of it sitting at a console. Now, I'm not the only one who's gotten these pictures either. Debbie Ziegelmeyer got one she was on one of my cases and she took a picture. It sounds absolutely crazy, and I couldn't believe it the first time I saw it. I still can't believe it. Have you any cases like that you've run across?
No, I've not ever heard of anything like that where you got like and how large was the ball of light, or could you
About
tell?
the size of a softball in all of the cases.
Yeah. So there are these classifications of, size, if you would, where objects that are that size can actually appear to move quite intelligently, and they're different. They may be a different phenomena altogether than what you were talking about with the Earth-like phenomena.
Right.
And so I do know that the Earth-like phenomena, for example, people will often report, and you'll see this in the William Corliss books as well, but they will see on the inside of them that there's like swirling plasmas, if you would, or it's like little, they might see like a worm kind of like effect, a bunch of worms, if you would. They're swirling patterns, that are all over the place, which, conceivably could look like, because humans have a tendency to want to see patterns,
Right.
make patterns fit, But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that there are these swirling patterns that are sometimes reported in those things that are rather unusual and could be misidentified as being, maybe something like an alien. But I don't know. I mean, if we've got objects, we could potentially have objects because, if you think about it, there's all types of sizes of fish in the ocean, right? You got sea creatures that are extremely small and everything else. Why do we want to put, aliens into being 3 foot or 4 foot tall when you could potentially have aliens being any number of sizes, right?
Right.
You could have an object with some sort of an intelligence behind it that could be a relatively small being from a different planet or whatever like that, or a different kind of phenomenon altogether. But that's speculation on my part. But I've not seen any evidence in my 58 years of having witnessed an alien inside of a small object. We tend to think of them as being more like remotely controlled, that they're kind of like our drones, if you would, and they have some sort of an intelligence behind them, maybe, or in them, or whatever, or sending signals back somewhere else or something of that nature. But anyway, it's a wide and very diverse phenomenon, isn't it, Margie? I mean, you see
it sure is, and as an investigator, you have to keep an open mind to all possibilities, don't you? Yeah, because there are a lot of things
really
that can happen.
I mean, because you will hear, and just, I think that the tendency we have on a lot of UFO investigators and many of the reports that I've actually looked at in MUFON database and others, we have a tendency to want to go out and we look at just the impact of the UFO. What was the UFO? What was its shape? What was it? And we miss the fact that there might be, for example, other kind of physical effects. There might be psychological effects to the witness. There might be all different kinds of medical things that might crop up, and we don't spend as much time, or we're not trained to be able to handle those types of things and really truly recognize them. So I think that when you look at a UFO case, where there are probably many more aspects to it, but these other aspects are not being captured by the necessarily untrained investigator who just passed the test to be able to get out there to be it. And that, it's not like they're all psychologists, or they're not medical doctors. They're not trained in that. And so I think that we're missing a whole lot of, by the way, and I'm also very glad that they're coming out with us now that they're actually going to be looking at the physiological effects to the pilots and some of the other military people in the cases that the government's now going to be looking into, because there's apparently a large history of those kind of things as well, right?
And they finally went public with that, which is another little piece of the puzzle that they're letting go, so we can review it. And for those of us that have been doing this for 40 years and 50 years, it's kind of a vindication that they're finally going public with this, but it's also a little bit frustrating to me that they didn't do it a long time ago.
Well, you can imagine what I've gone through for 58 years and growing up next to Project Blue Book. I was thinking that Project Blue Book was going to actually, give some straight answers to it, but instead that we got, snowballed, we got whitewashed, and we didn't get any answers at all. In fact, they wanted to get out of it so much that they created the Condon report to be able to just get out of the whole program altogether.
Right. How many cases would you say that you look at every year?
Well, I mean, right now I'm not getting a lot. What I was telling you before was that we're getting these extremely complex cases and looking at just those. So we're tackling the ones where there's especially military systems engaged in it. So we basically are looking at a very small number. I'm saying that we're probably about 4 or 5. What over my lifetime, I've looked at thousands of cases, and then plus I've also, because of my role on the science review board with, or at least a team that was on the science review board for MUFON, I was literally looking at 200 cases a month and that was being reported to MUFON to see if we could identify the strongest cases that we could then assign to scientists. And so that was, I was looking at a lot of cases, and of course I was seeing a lot of cases that were coming in. And I also investigated, tons of cases here in Alabama and Mississippi myself.
It seems like a never-ending trail. And do you think that more people are reporting now, or do you think more people are seeing UFOs now?
Well, I think that, number one, you have to understand that the awareness and the openness now has been increased because the government's saying that you can do it, right? In other words, before you had a lot of people that wouldn't tell anybody because, it's like they'd be ridiculed, right? And so and there's still people out there that won't report and will never report, and so you have a much greater awareness going on that could lead to more people reporting things. You've also got more people that are, again, using cell phones, and you have to take a look at the cases, and you find out you can generally explain probably about 80 to 90% of the cases easily as an investigator being misidentified. And so a lot of the cases we were seeing coming into MUFON were people seeing lens flares on their camera. They're not used to seeing, right? These little balls of light that would be showing because they're pointing the camera toward the sun, or they'd be pointing the camera towards, a big light, and you would have these like lens flares, that little round orbs that look like that they're in the photo. And it's that they don't understand that that's the curvature of their lens and the way the lens works on the camera. And so, we were getting hundreds of those things in MUFON, hundreds of lens flares. And it was like, okay, well, it's just an uneducated population of people that are seeing them, and they don't know what they are. And, they just see it on the image after they get a look at the camera, or, the image, the photograph, but they don't see them, when they're looking through the camera. They just see them. And so we're spending a lot of time letting them know about lens flares and educating the public. In fact, I think the biggest thing the biggest thing that I tried to convince us to do in MUFON was to help. I had a huge collection of IFOs, and that is photographs. And I think that we need to do a better job of actually teaching people about what's up in the sky and what can be confused with UFOs, and to help them understand that, well, wait a minute, the planet Venus looks this way, the planet Jupiter looks this way. And a lot of people report those things.
Oh yeah, they do.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but that's just because you're dealing with a public that doesn't spend much time of understanding what's up in the sky. A lot of people don't know what sprites were, and we didn't even know about sprites until the last decade. And they're up in the atmosphere. A lot of people don't know about what happens with with the certain satellites where they actually catch, the glint of the sun, and they actually then can lead to a big bright ball of light up in the sky, or a big flash, if you would.
Yeah.
And it's from
Iridium flares.
Iridium flares, right?
Yeah.
And so you have those kind of things. You've also got, well, I mean, as well as I do, people report lenticular cloud formations as being UFOs.
Yeah, they do look like UFOs, don't they?
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's just, we have an uneducated public that's out there that needs educated in what's up in the sky. And then we would probably be able to eliminate a lot of the ash and trash and spend our time more on the UFO as opposed to how much time we spend on IFOs, right?
Well, I think thanks to the internet that the public has become more educated. The big thing right now that people are reporting is the Starlink satellites, because they're a string of white lights and they look like UFOs, and and they look like they're lower than they really are.
Sure.
So that's probably the number one thing that's misidentified right now.
The other thing that I'd like to point out is that, we also have more technology at our disposal, and consequently that's leading to more fakes being created than we've ever seen. You have all these wannabe film producers that can easily go and take their computer and they can add in all kinds of CGI effects into videos. And so consequently, the whole public is being educated about fake news, if you would, and seeing all these fake videos, and are leaving, are extremely gullible and buy into those kinds of things. And so the whole concept of critical thinking has gone out the door, and gullibility has gone out the door. And so consequently, now you have a public that out there believes that every UFO that's up on just because it's on YouTube is suddenly a real UFO, and this is how they are. It's not the case.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, you have people who are looking at the real thing and don't believe it. They don't believe it no matter what.
Sure.
And that's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah. So it goes back to a lack of education, and we just don't educate the public well enough about the whole subject and let them know that, that the bottom line is seeing a legitimate UFO is extremely rare event. But, you have to be aware of the fact that a lot of these things are not that case. And then you have to do the due diligence of actually looking into it and really treating it that way. But anyway, again, there's also the phenomena that's out there that, like the Earthlight phenomena, that they get misunderstood. You also have classified defense systems that are being flown in the skies that they're classified. You or I wouldn't know about them because they're not going to tell you. And so some of those things are being misidentified as UFOs. And so, and then you have add in drones. Drones are now being equipped with all different kinds of things and are suddenly now becoming it. And you also know that Chinese lanterns were also being called orbs, and people were misidentifying those. So again, we just don't, people are not educated in what's up there, and they call them UFOs. And then many times, even if you give a logical explanation of these things, the public will not accept that, and they will call them UFOs and continue to do it that way in perpetuity. And they will reject you and call you fake news.
Yeah, so, they do. Sometimes there's a witness that gets really, really upset because you have debunked it. And it's hard to deal with that, but it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we have had cases like I was mentioning to you before that the Google Loon balloon was launched from here in Huntsville a number of years back in 2012, and it took off from here at Redstone Arsenal near NASA, and it started rising up, and suddenly people around my area were saying, "Hey, I'm seeing a UFO, a cylindrical object that was moving through the sky." It seemed to be light, and then would go dark, light, dark, and do this thing. It was a clear sky, early morning, and I was able to track it for the next 4 days as it went up to Canada. And by the way, so was Google. They were tracking it because they were looking at UFO reports that were coming in. I looked at it in MUFON database, followed it up through four states, I believe, that was moving along with the wind. And it took about 4 days before it got up even to Kentucky. But anyway, it got up into Kentucky. And all along the way, people were seeing it, reporting it as a UFO. Investigators all had different opinions about what it was, and it was a struggle. But these things don't have any like state line boundaries. They go across state lines all the time. And like I said, this one came down up in Canada. But if you told people that was a Google Loon balloon, which was a secret project at the time, they would say you're just telling a lie.
Yeah. I'll tell you what is the best real UFO case you've ever worked on?
Well, I think obviously, to me, something on the scale of the Nimitz is pretty doggone incredible. Mm-hmm. There you've got, trained pilots. In fact, there were two that were up in the air on the combat mission with four people in it, right? And then you also had another Marine pilot that was out there that actually witnessed something below the water line. He didn't actually see the Tic Tac, but 4 eyes that were on the Tic Tac. And you have one of them, Commander Fravor, who dives down and is a Top Gun kind of pilot, goes out and does some sort of circling with it as he's doing some sort of maneuver. And he cuts across the circle that he was doing with the object doing a circle around him. And when he does that, the object suddenly responds and then shoots up and shoots off and goes to basically a secret place they call the cap point. And when you take a look at the speeds of that, and by the way, the people on the Princeton actually saw the objects doing it for several days, kind of dropping from 28,000 feet or even higher down to sea level. Then you had Kevin Day, who saw it go from 20,000 feet, stop at sea level. And when you take a look at the data for the physics of that, and you say that this is an object that's basically, maybe 13 feet high and about 40 feet wide, no kind of surfaces, no kind of propulsion system visible, just a Tic Tac that's round, not round, but it has no control surfaces, no wings to it, nothing like that. It does these kind of maneuvers where it drops in 0.78 seconds, not even 1 second. It goes from 20,000 feet and stops at sea. And, how do you do that with the type of stuff we have on Earth, where everything would disintegrate? We don't have metals that can withstand the G-forces. We don't have anything that would do that without creating a sonic boom. We don't have anything that would have heated up in the atmosphere. It didn't do that. The kinetic power that would have been released by that from a physics standpoint was equivalent to basically the power output of Hoover Dam. And it was going at, basically Mach 55. And if you think of hypersonics, that's just going above Mach 5. Okay, so, now you're talking about something at Mach 50 and greater.
Wow.
How do you say that's not the most compelling case? And it is, in my book. I would say the evidence and everything supports that whole thing as being one of the best cases we've ever had. And it's also got the video taken by the other guy that went up and actually saw it and got it captured in thermal. And we're seeing that in thermal, it doesn't necessarily heat up, if you would. It's basically so it doesn't even have the thermal signature like an aircraft would. So what is that?
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. What about when you were with MUFON and in Alabama? What's your best case from that area?
Well, I've had, I had a number of cases that cropped up where I had triangles that were showing up, especially in the Birmingham area. And I think that some of those were rather interesting cases that I could not explain And no matter how much I looked at it, I there was no explanation that actually fit. I did identify that a B-2 bomber was located over at the nearby international airport that's over there. There's a section where it had a B-2 bomber, but and a number of reports I believe were the B-2 bomber, but you still had objects that were triangular shaped that just didn't. It matched what we have in the way of other reports, with being an object that would actually come up, and it was triangular. It would have the lights underneath it, and it would actually then turn like that and then shoot off in an instant, incredible rate of speed. And so you had a number of witnesses that actually saw it from different positions. So I think that was an incredible case that I had here. Plus, I also investigated in 2013. I investigated a case of a pilot that was up in Mississippi that was coming up, and he was literally like flying in a Cessna aircraft, a small aircraft, and he was moving along on a nice clip. Early in the morning, he took off just north of New Orleans, and as he was moving up, he looked out of his window and saw a 4-foot disc-shaped object underneath the wing of his aircraft. That's how close it was.
Wow.
And so it was following along with him, and he was able to look at it and say, well, what the heck is that? And he can observe the fact that it had no kind of like propulsion, nothing that was visible, but it was keeping up with him, right? So he goes, and it suddenly started pulling back away from him. So he goes up and kind of does a turnaround and comes back, and he can't see it any longer. We actually we filed through FAA we were looking for the information on the radar data, and basically we're able to get like 6 different sites that had it. We were able to get one where it was clearly, you could actually see him moving along with his aircraft. So we knew that he was, in that area, what area he was in. At the same time, we got one FAA station that actually caught the object. And when it pulled back from his plane, it basically slowed down. It was moving at like 35 miles an hour. So it went from like about 240 miles an hour back to about 35 miles an hour. And it was making 120-degree turns. And we got that flight path of that object, which was bizarre.
35 miles an hour. That's awfully slow. Planes can't fly that slow, can they?
No. I mean, you have to have them going up better than about 100 mile an hour easily to be able to maintain their lift. And so this thing would have fallen out of the sky. But again, it has no propellers, nothing like that. It's flying on something else. We don't know what that is, and why. Anyway, but that was an incredible case. In fact, that was on a front page on the MUFON journal. I think back in 2013.
Have to look that one up. Do you think that people are more open now to the UFO idea? And also, why do we call them UAPs now instead of UFOs for the most part?
I think that as we've already talked about here, there's a whole host of phenomena out there. It's not just objects, if you would. Sometimes you call it an object, you think of something solid, right? You think of maybe something, and it's also just, they're not just flying. They're going into the water. They're coming out of the water, and they're up. And we, why do we need another term to call it USO when you can have a term like aerospace, which takes in space, air, and also water? So in SCU, we don't use the term unidentified aerial phenomena. We talk about unidentified aerospace phenomena. That allows us to talk about an object that can do what these things are doing, which means that it's going through all these 3 mediums, right?
That sounds like a much better term. I like that idea.
Yeah,
okay, I'm going to start using that.
Well, no, in fact, Lou Elizondo, when he was here, he said that's the right term to be using, because ultimately it takes in all of our aerospace world, if you would. And we have an
Mhm.
aerospace industry, which includes things in the water as well, the Navy. So, I mean, bottom line is the same object can do all three things. And so let's just use one term
Yeah.
and go with that one. And that's what we decided to do in SCU, was to just go with aerospace phenomena, because it's unidentified. And it's a phenomena that we don't really understand. I mean, it's not an object per se, because, what if you have a ball of gas?
Exactly. Right. And
what
the
if you
spook
have
lights.
Yeah, spook
Yeah.
lights. What if you got those things like you're describing, where they're going through walls? Would you call that an object, or is it some sort of other kind of thing it's a phenomena, right? So
Right.
that's why we chose to use that.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time for this evening, but Rich, thank you so much for being on the program. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And could I just put a plug in for the conference that I got?
Yes, please do.
In June, the beginning of June, we have the SU conference here in Huntsville, and it's also going to be virtual. And we've got we're going to have evidence that shows very clearly from the Catalina Island. In fact, I don't know if you know about this, but UAPX has been able to capture some solid evidence. They're going to be presenting that at the conference. And we've also got Ryan Graves, who's going to be our keynote. So if you're interested,
awesome.
Go to our website. We've got scientists like you wouldn't believe going to be presenting. It's virtual as well as it's in person. And you can go to explorescu.org.
Okay, will do. Thanks so much, Rich. I hope you'll come on again sometime soon.
Glad to be aboard, and thank you for inviting me, Margie.
Okay. This is Margie Kay with UNX News, and join me here again next week. I'll see you then.